automation and orchestration, endpoint detection and response, network visibility, cloud, containers, DevSecOps, threat intelligence, security platforms. Wondering how to keep up with all the latest security products and trends while still keeping your organization safe? Then stick around to listen to Ready, Set, Secure, the SET Solutions Podcast.
We are live. Hello, everybody. Here. Welcome to Ready, Set, Secure, the SET Solutions live stream and podcast. And I don't know if we're getting some echo, maybe. Hopefully not. I don't know. We'll see. Sounds like it just went away. So we're good. Love the live streaming. It's always going to have something fun and exciting. So again, episode 34 of Ready, Set, Secure, SET Solutions Podcast and live stream. As usual, Justin Hutchins, aka Hutch, is joining us. How you doing, Hutch?
Doing good.
Thanks for joining us.
Happy Monday.
Yeah, happy Monday. We are definitely doing this on a Monday. And joining us for the first time, well, his first time, and for the first time having somebody in our studio that is not a part of SET Solutions, even though you're connected to part of SET Solutions. Right. Nolen Bucek, Dean and Draper, insurance specialist.
Yes,
is that
sir.
right?
Yes,
Is that what
sir.
you would call yourself?
That's a nice way to put it. Yes, insurance specialist, Dean and Draper. Been there for 11 years now. So, and I'm only 36. Started right out of college, and
nice.
Been there from the first day. Still there, and happy to be there. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. If you haven't figured it out, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity insurance today, and Nolen is our agent, insurance. Agent. Sorry, everybody likes to throw stuff at that term, but we do work with Nolen, and Nolen is a cybersecurity insurance specialist as well. Correct.
That's
so
right.
It's a specialist in your field.
Correct.
So thank you very much for joining us. We are going to get into some, I don't want to say exciting. Maybe it'd be exciting, fun topic. I mean, something that's
important
definitely definitely on everybody's mind. So we will get into that. But as always, we're going to talk about SET Solutions really quickly, and then talk about some news, and then we'll get into the main segment. So let's jump right into the new, or not into news, but into the SET Solutions segment. So a few quick updates. You'll hear me continuously talking about Greg Porterfield's blog series. He had the latest one come out very recently on SQL injection. It's one of those attacks that I hear people say does not exist anymore, and it's absolutely still exists. Hutch can tell you. How often do you find SQL injection attacks still out there?
I actually just found one just the other day on a client that we were working for, so it's definitely still an issue.
I read an article the other day that was really slamming on somebody going deep into SQL injection, saying that that's just not an avenue of attack anymore. It's not near as prevalent, and I was like, oh, no, it still exists. It's still out there. So go read that. That's, again, his whole journey to becoming an OSCP, and it just the fun he's having building out those environments. September 9th, I'm going to be on a webinar with Salt Security talking about the top API myths. And as if you have paid attention to anything I've been saying lately, you know that I'm doing a API webinar about once every 2 weeks or something, but definitely a big important topic. And this is a little premature. We'll talk about this again, but in October, as if you're in this industry, you know that it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we are going to be doing a CTF. We did the first one last year. Hutch is the key guy in getting that set up. So be on the lookout for an announcement around how to play in our CTF. We're going to be involved in a local security conference here in Houston, HoustonCon, which is near and dear to my heart. And then Hutch is going to be in October, I think, talking at the automotive. Is that October or is that September?
That is a good question.
That's in October.
Speaking at enough conferences that they all kind of blur together at this point.
He's going to be doing some talking around car hacking and stuff like that. So that's coming up. And James Hines, who's our director of solution architecture, is actually going to be talking in person, and you're going to be doing the one in that's the recorded one, because they're going to have a virtual and a physical one face-to-face. So that's an interesting space for us to get into, the Automotive Aftermarket Suppliers Association Conference. This is the first time they've ever done a cyber track, so we're really excited about getting into that. So Now we will talk about the news. So we're going to summarize articles real quick, and then we'll get into each one of them. So Nolen picked up on a pretty important one out there where Microsoft is warning thousands of their cloud customers about exposed databases. So kind of their core key database that you use in Azure is got some exposure. Very interesting one from a cloud perspective, kind of scary. I am going to be talking about 1 year later, a look back at zero login vulnerability, log on vulnerability, which was a big one about a year ago. And I'm pretty sure it's still being popped by some people, and not everybody's patched because not everybody does. Then Hutch is going to be talking about yet another cybersecurity framework, because we need another one, like we need a hole in the head.
Right.
But NIST will do what NIST does. So that's all right. We'll see how that works out. All right. Well, with that, let's get into the first one. So Nolen, why don't you kind of talk about what your article's about, and then bring us any key points, and then we'll kind of discuss.
That's right. And I kind of like this one because it's got some parts to it that will tie into the main segment when we get into the insurance portion of it. But thousands of the cloud computing customers, including some very, very large companies, identified that intruders could have the ability to get inside the main database, and that there was vulnerability there. It was through Microsoft Azure's flagship called the Cosmos DB database. And so a research team was able to go in there and basically find the vulnerability, and were able to see what the problem was and reach out to the people who they knew were affected. Now, there's still possibly folks out there who don't know they could be affected. And what's interesting about this too, I thought, was, Microsoft wasn't able to change the situation. The customer actually had to do it themselves. So Microsoft had to reach out to the customers, tell them to change things on their end in order to protect themselves. So that kind of is a unique situation and kind of a scary one at the same time, because you hope your customer read the email, they got the notification, and they actually made the changes. Otherwise, they still could be intruded, and then that still falls back on Microsoft. And the part that I saw that I know will tie in directly into our main segment is they even put in here, and this was on the Insurance Business Journal, is where I found this article. Of course, I'm sure it's publicized quite a few other places, but Microsoft agreed to pay $40,000, which we all know is a parking ticket for them, but for finding the flaw and reporting it. That's for finding the flaw and reporting it, not necessarily something happening, then them being notified and reporting it. $40,000 can be quite expensive. So what we'll get into in the main segment, as these guys lead me into it, is kind of how you can insure against costs like that, and how those costs can increase, and how insurance is a way to get a whole lot more coverage at a little bit less of a cost, because this is just the very tip of the iceberg of a scenario like this, where it could cost employer substantial money. Just finding the problem and notifying it is just the first step. So we'll get into that later on, but I thought this would tie in nicely. They said they fixed the issue and the people have been notified, but I assume there's still some yet to come on this one, but we'll dive in how that works in the insurance later on.
So I think that the interesting thing to me, other than just the tie-in to insurance, is that, well, a couple of things. One, it was a bug bounty. So a lot of times companies have these bug bounties. They, especially like a Microsoft, they've got money in a pool sitting there for a bug bounty. So again, if you're a big company like Microsoft, that's not even a rounding error. That's a rounding error of a rounding error of a rounding error. But the fact that they've got a pool, if you're a smaller company that wants to put a bug bounty program together, maybe insurance is a good way to go about that. Second thing from the flaw itself is, this is kind of the good side and the bad side of cloud in my mind. One, the good side is that you're able to patch something in a cloud provider. They're able to patch it centrally, so they don't have to go all over the place to get that fixed. The bad thing here is that it's going to affect a ton of more people generally as more cloud adoption happens. So there's kind of that if and are, which one are you willing to deal with? And then the keys I believe it's some keys that got stolen. If I remember is that what it was?
Yep.
Yeah. So with the keys getting stolen, so the vulnerability's fixed, but the keys have still been exposed. So if you haven't changed your keys, then that was the big thing, is like, there was a vulnerability. You need to go change your keys because somebody has access to them. So now you've got to go do a whole key rotation. but at least the core vulnerability is fixed in a central spot. So that's, I said 2, but it was 3 things.
So the way that I understand it is that the core vulnerability is fixed in the sense of going forward for
Yep.
any new clients that do spin
Correct.
up an instance of Cosmos DB. They'll create a new key. That key won't be stored insecurely, however the others were. And I did notice that there weren't a lot of technical details here. That's probably a good thing because of the fact that I would assume that a lot of organizations are still vulnerable and probably will be for a long time. And the reason being is you've got cloud engineers that come into one company, set things up, leave, and then the people that are there don't have a clue as to how the environment is configured. So I would imagine that there are vulnerable environments where clients don't even realize that they're vulnerable. And what is, I think, interesting and makes this situation uniquely complex is obviously the flaw was on Microsoft's end. Microsoft has now gone and notified each of the affected tenants who are using that Azure Cosmos DB solution. Presumably, there are going to be a decent percentage of those that don't remediate immediately. So what I'm wondering is, and I think this is, you talk about kind of who's at fault. Obviously, at the core, Microsoft was originally the one that introduced the flaw, but then once they're notified, the question is, if something were to happen and a client was negligent and didn't immediately change that key, is the client at fault who is using the Microsoft service? Is Microsoft at fault? And so I think it introduces a really, and I think that we're getting more and more like this in the industry as we move into a larger cloud adoption world of this shared stack where you've got multiple different organizations that are owning different components of the security stack and of the technology stack. And I think it makes it really convoluted as to assigning fault or blame when something happens.
Yeah, it gets really messy. It really does. There's digital transformation is introducing all kinds of things that we didn't think about. But in this case, what you're talking about is you still have individual instances. To me, that's like an AWS. You've got an AMI that you use, and then there's a flaw in that. You still got to go change all of that stuff up. And if you don't do your due diligence, then really that becomes no difference than doing it on-prem. It's just that, how much work have you got to do via cloud, via on-prem. So it's a mess. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
Appreciate that.
Just to add to that real quick, if it were to go into suit, which I don't think it will, but if it did, who's liable? Everybody's getting called in. So, be interesting to see how it plays out. But anyone who took a breath on the situation whatsoever is going to be named. It's just, again, it'll be interesting to see who really has to fall on the sword there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for that. We'll jump over to the next one. So there was a pretty good article that I found on, I thought it was really good, on Dark Reading that Kelly Sheridan put together, excuse me, which is 1 year later, a look back at zero logon. So if you know anything about the zero logon, that was a pretty big deal. It was a PrivEsk flaw that started at like an 8.8, and which was big, but there were multiple different vulnerabilities that were kind of trying to get fixed at the same time. And everybody was and if you know anything about 2020, you know that it was all this stuff being found on top of COVID happening and everything else. But what she really focused on, which I thought was really interesting in the article, was that it went from an 8.8 to a 10 once they finally went back and looked at it. But the initial flaw, or the initial, when it got put out, the initial score was scored at an 8.8. And that was kind of what everybody was like, oh, well, that's bad. That's a PrivEsk, but it's not as high. It's not a 9+, and I've got all these other ones that I'm dealing with. And what they didn't have happen is when it got raised to a 10, for them to go back and tell everybody, hey, this is actually a 10. That was a big thing that they focused on in the article. And it kind of pushed out another question about the whole system of letting people know what's happening when it comes to vulnerabilities and when they're getting patched and how you should prioritize. And if you don't see that notification, that all of a sudden it gets elevated much more quickly, it just, or not quickly, but after the fact, then it becomes kind of all right, well, how do I prioritize this now? Because this was going to be a typical test Tuesday, let's fix this. Then all of a sudden it was out of cycle. And I think a lot of people missed that. And what it ended up happening is a lot of people took advantage of that because a lot of patching didn't happen that should have happened. So it's a great article to go back and run through it. Hutch, I mean, what are your thoughts on the article?
I think I have a slightly different take from the author in terms of why this may not have gotten the attention that it deserved. And that is largely that, and this has been a problem in my opinion for probably going on easy 5 years, if not longer than that. But if I had to pinpoint where the problem started, I would say it was Heartbleed. But that was that the response to vulnerabilities and the seriousness with which people associate with vulnerabilities is largely based on the media hype associated with
That's
it.
That's a good point.
And honestly, I think a lot of times people aren't even looking at the CVSS score. They're just looking at how much media attention is this thing getting. And I think, like I said, Heartbleed was kind of the first one where you had almost a marketing campaign combined with the vulnerability. And then you saw other ones like Poodle, which was also way overhyped, but was just this very academic SSL vulnerability that would pretty much require like nation state capabilities and very specific, but the fact that it had this name campaign behind it, people were absolutely terrified and shuffling. So I think, unfortunately, that is a lot of times what drives response is that media hype. And this definitely, so Zero Logon definitely had some, it maybe not as much as you see with other campaigns. I guess on the other side of things, when you talk about the severity of internal vulnerabilities or privilege escalation vulnerabilities, I know that we've talked before on our podcast about how there is still that fallacy in the industry that if it's behind the firewall, if it's on your internal network, it's not as serious. And I think that may have been some of the thinking for the organization that evaluates the CVSS score is, well, you're going to have to be internal and have access to a domain controller in order for this to be an issue. And so perhaps as an industry, we're finally getting past that fallacy as well and considering things, I guess, from a perspective of consumed or assumed compromise, that there likely is somebody that is going to have access, and what is the risk of the vulnerability independent of that requirement of them getting that level of access in the first place.
Yeah, when something's built up, I mean, it's a good point. Heartbleed and Poodle are cool names. Zero Logon's like, okay, but you know, so who picked up and ran with it to say, oh, everything's going to blow up? But and also to your point, it's we can't come at it, but the whole system's been around for so long that, you know, zero trust wasn't a thing, if you want to use that as the marketing term that goes around it. But it's essentially what it is. You need to assume, like you said, that compromise is there, and this is not a matter of where it is. It's a matter of somebody's going to be able to take advantage of this. Is that a phishing campaign, or somebody stolen credentials, something already in your network, and they're going to be able to take advantage of this? Just assume that they're already in there, and this thing's going to get popped. Any inside of that, from a cybersecurity, I mean, thinking about it not from a insurance perspective, I mean, is there any?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'll bring up, it sounds like, you know, kind of a score on vulnerability to an extent. And so, you know, you're seeing right now, and we'll get into it with insurance companies underwriting for cybersecurity policies, that a lot of them like to do kind of a pre-audit on how secure your network is currently. And, you know, where the market was a lot, you know, in insurance called hard and soft market. Soft market, prices are low, everybody's quoting, a lot of competition, years, so everyone's a lot more relaxed. And cyber through the last 5 years is increasingly hardened to where they're asking a lot more questions now. They want to do the pre-audit test. They want to see that you have internal, not just a firewall, not just the protection, but, you know, what's your incident response? Okay, you found out there was data breached. What do we do next? What's your guys' plan next? Of course, call the insurance, get them involved, but do you actually have a plan of action? And so you're seeing a lot of that more. But as you go to it, there's even some underwriters who will get your information and score the company on what they can get from them. You know, check the black web, see if there's any other information floating around, and see what their score is, and you'll kind of get underwritten and priced based on that score. So it's really, really important, as it is just because you want to protect your data, but it's really important to actually have a service and a software in place right now as an employer, because there's those indirect costs like the insurance and things that could be higher than expected because you maybe don't have that in place.
Yeah. All right. Well, I won't thank myself for bringing that article to the table. You can thank me, Hutch, if you want to.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, you're welcome.
For introducing that article.
All right, so next up is the last article, and this is what Hutch brought to us. White House tasked NIST with producing another cybersecurity framework. Do we need another cybersecurity framework?
And honestly, that's the reason that this article caught my attention. Is for me, I mean, there's already multiple very good cybersecurity frameworks out there. I mean, NIST already has their own. You've got CIS, you've got ISO 27001. And largely every single one of them, while they may structure it slightly differently, focuses on the same things. The fundamentals haven't changed. And so for me, we don't need another cybersecurity framework. We need to verify that organizations are actually adhering to those fundamentals. All of these major breaches that we've seen recently, a lot of times they come down to either failure to apply or to properly scrutinize over those fundamentals, whether that's isolation or hardening or patching. A lot of times it's very simple things that are being overlooked, or they just aren't being managed effectively enough, that results in those breaches. So I think that I appreciate the fact that we're finally getting some political acknowledgement of the issue of cybersecurity. That being said, I think that the approach is not correct here.
I mean, to me, I don't know. It's almost like busy work. It's like, okay, we know we need to do something, so let's go create some initiatives to do something, instead of saying we've got, to your point, 4 and 5 really good frameworks. If you count some other ones that are on the side, some people may not count, and maybe apply to different industries. And there's always been this initiative or this desire to say we need to have one framework to rule them all, but it's just all of the mappings that happen. I mean, you're going to create busy work. You're going to have groups upon groups upon groups that are going to go put guidance into this thing and go, well, 800-53 says do it here, and cybersecurity framework says do it here, and it's the exercise that they went through with HIPAA to get them from all of these different ones to focus
each of the matrix
and you're going to give frameworks, and you're going to give a bunch of GRC specialists a lot of cool work and some billable work over the next few years. And God bless them, GRC, is a necessary thing that needs to go into there. But I don't see the reason for it, and it's what frustrates me. We've had many discussions here about government doing things the way they do them. Just go back and watch the one with Lynn on what we talked about. We're probably all on the list now, but you probably already were. So I don't know. It's just frustrating. I do agree that it's completely unnecessary. They should focus on what's there and use that, and then let's actually make some actions happen versus all of these different. Here's an order, here's an executive order. Everybody gets an executive order. Now let's build another NIST framework. So it doesn't make any sense to me, but you got to have something to say.
Well, maybe it's because, maybe I hate to say it, and this is y'all's world, not mine, but maybe that this is being spoken about from a political stance because the American public is a little bit weary of some of the stuff that's happened, right? With some of the pipeline and break-in. And so, hey, we're doing something. We're doing this new thing. Well, how much of it are they really going to do? I'm not sure. It sounds like what's there is good. It's just some overlooking, and maybe this is just a give the public some more confidence that, they see there's an issue and they're going to try to fix it. But
we try not to get political on here. We really do. But I mean, we call a spade when it comes to the government.
Right.
It doesn't matter what party's in place. This is going to happen. And it's just frustrating when you've got an industry who is, ever since the infamous meeting with all of the hackers from Loft on, at that table and being like, we need to do something, and going on and on and on, and it just continues to be lip service, and then something is built in, and we're finally getting some stuff going on, and we see this pipeline happen, to your point, right. And now we're like, well, here we go, let's build another framework. It's like, that's not what we want. That's not what we need. We need actual action to happen, right. To say, we've got frameworks, let's start doing the real work.
And honestly, I think a part of the problem is if you look at congressional depositions and hearings related to cybersecurity, it is very apparent that there is a total lack of understanding
Absolutely.
of not just cybersecurity, but even technology
I agree.
in our government. And so I guess for me, this doesn't really address that problem either. I mean, this is just one more time defining the same things of what we should be doing, which isn't going to speak any more effectively to our politicians who don't understand the problems. So
all of a sudden now you're giving me more spreadsheets. I mean,
Yep.
Okay, well, all that, we always end in some kind of depressing,
try to.
suppressing story there. So it is what it is. Okay, well, that's it for news. Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for your comments. So now we are going to get into the main segment. So again, we brought Nolen in to talk about cybersecurity insurance. We want you to talk about, kind of the topics we had gone through, which is the current state. We want to talk about more clients requiring cyber insurance policies as part of their MSAs, which we definitely see. Kind of how the insurance works in general. I kind of want to dig into some of the, y'all get a bad rap, this insurance is insurance. There's always this, well, my insurance said I was going to get this and I didn't get that because that wasn't covered, even though I thought it was covered.
Right.
Yada, yada, yada. I want to dig into that stuff. But I also, I told him not to hit too hard on this because we all have issues. But I will say that we've got some questions around just in general. So it was kind of timely. There's a podcast out there called Risky Business Podcast that I listen to. You guys based out of Australia. He does some really good stuff. And part of what they brought up in their last podcast, I think it was last week, was around cybersecurity insurance. And we all deal with risk in this industry quite a bit. We always have risk calculations, is how likely is it going to happen, all of this stuff. But is the risk calculation that happens within insurance compatible with the risk equations and risk calculations that happen on our side? And are we ever going to get to a point where we can say cybersecurity insurance is actually what you need? Can you offset your costs with that effectively? I know that's kind of a hard question. I don't mean it to be hard hitting. I'm trying to sort those things out. Can we start from that?
We can start from there, wherever. I give you the bullet points, and I started taking all my notes, and I said, well, I'm sort of on the points, but no, we can go wherever y'all want to go with it. So, I don't know specifically on y'all side as far as the evaluating the risk, but I can say some of the frustration I could see on the consumer side of insurance, and keep in mind, I'm also a consumer. I have to pay insurance as well. Mm-hmm. They don't give it. If you sell it, they don't give it to you for free. But anyway, when it comes to that, is unfortunately some of the good performing clients, such as Set Solutions, the ones who do a good job, who have the good internal. I mean, what y'all do for a living, obviously going to do it for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So you obviously are set up extremely secure, and that does help. The problem is there are bad actors out there who are into your industry, who don't do that, who don't have the right procedures in place. And so when they go out and they mess up and people's information gets taken, or their information gets taken, or whatever the case may be, and it causes a loss, it causes claims dollars, everybody gets affected. Yeah. Now, if you can still, through the underwriting process, show how secure you are, you look at your claims, you're running really clean, you're doing a good job, you're still going to pay lower than the guy who's doing bad. But unfortunately, there's other actors within your industry that will drive your rates up, even though you might not deserve it. So, as part of the agency, that's really our job, is to communicate to an underwriter as pretty as possible the client, right? I got into sales. I thought so much of it was, before I knew anything, was sitting across the table and having some really cool closing lines that, book the deal and all that. It's really not it. Really what it is it's taking your client, putting together a proposal to an underwriter that is extremely admirable, extremely, ones that will actually get them interested, and ones that look good and look clean. I mean, it's really hard to convince underwriters to give you a good price when, all the questions to, are you doing this and are you doing that to help secure your business, are no. I don't have a whole lot of a leg to stand on to help. But to kind of answer your question, I hope I am, is, some of the frustration with the insurance is, why are my costs going up? We haven't had a claim in 5 years. And unfortunately, part of that is the market, that you might be the good guy keeping it low, or gal, but the other people are bringing it up. So I do see that frustration with the consumers. And so, sometimes it's a matter of moving around markets, who you're with now. Somebody might come in and they say, hey, we need some more tech accounts. We'll come buy the account. We'll come in so cheap that we'll take it. And when that happens, that's great, but that's not the long-term goal. And that's not going to really work long-term. What's going to work long-term is having the right measures inside internally, running clean. And then you look like a good account to multiple carriers. And so they're all looking at it. And then you kind of pit them against each other. And that's when you come out with the best price and product. But you also got to be really careful. You had mentioned, what's the insurance really going to pay for? Well, there's limits, and then there's what they call sublimits. You need to really have an understanding. Maybe you have $1 million policy, but they have a social engineering sublimit that's $100,000. Well, that's not very much. So you need to really make sure you look into the details, because they might break out the limits into smaller limits, and where you said, well, I got $1 million policy. Why aren't you paying after 100,000? Well, actually only have 100,000 for that specific claim. So you got to be really careful. It's the interpretation. It's being able to explain the policy itself and to be able to show them how it's going to react. Luckily when it comes to cybersecurity, for the most part, unless you're kind of blatantly negligent, there's not a ton of exclusions that you might see in different type of policies for different industries. So for the most part, it should respond to what happened, in your certain situation. But
let me ask you a question. Sorry to interrupt you. Let me ask you a question with that, and then I'll let Hutch get in here. So how much does your industry look at things like, so you mentioned social engineering being a specific case that they want to look at, and maybe that covers less, which, without digging into that, we can talk about that all day.
A lot of different.
If you get social engineered, then how do you trace back? And there's all kinds of attribution issues you've got to think about then. What is social engineering? Is that a fish? Is that somebody walking through the door or whatever? But,
right.
But how much does the industry look at specifically and this is some of the anecdotal things I've heard, but I don't really have data to back it up, but to say, okay, ransomware now is a huge thing. It is absolutely hurting everybody across the board, going after really worrisome industries like healthcare and stuff like that, and especially in a time of pandemic. Right. So how much does the cybersecurity insurance industry look at those things and say, this is going to raise everybody's rates? Or is it very specific to say, that's not going to raise everybody's rates, but we're going to put something very specific in there about ransomware, and we're going to limit that coverage? And how granular does that go? Right.
And so absolutely, they look at that across board. They'll look at, they have actuarials and things like that that can help, get them to a number. At the same time, they're looking at what's happening industry-wide. So they are looking at trends. They're looking at, are we trending upward? Are claims continuing to happen? Do we think they're going to continue to happen? Okay, well, we've got to put ourselves in a position where we can maybe recoup some of that money by hiring, increasing the premiums just a little bit. So they absolutely do look at frequency. Really scares insurance companies more than severity. One big pop here and there, you assume it's probably not going to happen again. When you see a frequency of ransomware happening over and over and over, you definitely get, they put that into account. They put that in the rating, and each insurance company is going to look at it differently. Some are going to be able to do it a little bit more competitively. They're not as worried. Some are going to go, we got popped 3 times last year, big with that one. We're excluding ransomware, or we're only going to do a sublimit, or we might just decline clients moving forward.
So is that based on the number of times they've gotten claims, or is that based on general data that they're pulling to say ransomware across the board, insured or not, is a big issue and is happening more frequently? Or is it both?
Yes. Okay. I was going to say the answer to that question is yes. Yeah. So absolutely for them individually, but they look at it as a whole, big time. So they might be running okay, but if they see it as a whole, but the ones who are running pretty good, probably not going to hurt as bad. The ones who are, you're going to see it. Real quick, interesting tidbit. Ransomware payments increased 341% to a total of $412 million during 2020 alone. That's an increase from 19 to 20. So you better believe insurance companies take note of that. And a large piece of that 412 million were payments from a cybersecurity policy. That's not necessarily a policy holder. So insured, uninsured, whichever the case may be, they do see this, right? So they say, well, that's a lot. We are getting targeted. The pandemic has got a lot of people working remote, well, how are folks logging in remotely? Are you just going to MicrosoftOffice.com and logging in from there? Well, that's not very secure. So that's worrisome, educating your staff. don't go into Starbucks and hook up to the Starbucks Wi-Fi and then log on remotely, because I've seen that happen with clients. Log on remote, then all your clients' data gets taken. And
if something like an awareness program may help if you have that in place.
Absolutely. And a big piece is, of course, there's what Set Solutions does, which is like absolutely day one what you need, right? You need the security software. But second is a big piece of it is educating your staff. A lot of it is human emotion. The way a lot of people are able to hack and get in is this is urgent, and you start to get involved. Hey, I really need you to help. I mean, we had luckily didn't do anything with it, a guy who just started working for us. And he said, our owner, he just emailed me and he just started working for us. I just got an email from him saying, give me my cell phone number. He needs something from me. And he felt emotionally pressure to respond because it's an owner and he just got hired. Well, I said, open the email. I don't think he's going to email you that. I'll call him on his cell phone right now. That's probably not going to happen. So, but if he were to work off his emotions, I just got hired. The boss is saying something to me. Okay, what do you need? It even goes farther than that. People can look on social media and see that the owner might be traveling. So all of a sudden an email pops up that says, hey, I need you to transfer money for me. You know that I'm gone, but I need you to do this. This is urgent. If you do this for me, oh man, it'll be such a big deal. We can talk promotion, and they work with the emotions of the staff. So you got to really train your people as best as you can. Some companies, we got 20-something-year-olds working for us. We got 60-plus-year-olds working for us. I get something funky in my email, I can kind of tell what it is. Maybe it's an older generation. It might be a little bit different.
Maybe even the younger may not.
And then the younger might not even. So, let's
let Hush jump in.
Yes.
I'm a little afraid. I'm not gonna lie to you, but
well, so you mentioned ransomware, and I think one thing that I've seen recently in the news with some of the events that we've seen is that we're seeing more and more cases where it's not just a phishing email or an attack from the outside, that you've actually got collusion with insider threats where somebody will essentially be part of the company and get paid a cut of the ransom. They'll be approached by somebody as part of the ransomware company, and then they will detonate some kind of malware internally in order to provide that foothold to the ransomware organization. What exists within cyber insurance programs that provide you opportunities to offset the risk of insider risks or malicious insiders?
Well, and that's tough, right? Because how do you know? I could say that I'm a great guy and I never do anything wrong, but how do you know it's really true, right? And so that's a really tough one to put a pin on, because you just really don't know. So you do the education, you do as much oversight as you can, you let them know the businesses, this is how we run, this is the way we do things. But that's a really tough one. Do they put that into account? Definitely, but they can't go and rate and underwrite you based on, you might have a bad apple in your group, because every company probably has a bad apple somewhere in some sort of way, shape, or form. But that's interesting. I haven't heard of the internal ones, but of course, I'm sure the ones that happen internally, you may not know that it was internal unless they can really trace it, unless they can really trace it back and say, no, this came from, your computer right here.
We just got off a session with Proofpoint, and they specifically bought a company called Observe It, or Observe IT, some people call it, but Observe It. And it's all about insider threats. So that's one of those things. If it came down to it, and it said, look, we have a particular propensity for whatever reason to have insider threats because we've got some information that nation states are going to want, and they're going to go try to get somebody in here to get, somebody that's dealing with federal government or something like that. Could it get as fine tuned to say, since we know if we do some type of risk analysis to say, we know we're susceptible to these types of attacks for some reason, and we specifically put something in place to go after that attack, would you be able to get to that granular of a level with insurance to say, okay, your rates are going to be a little bit lower because you've got a solution to go after this very particular thing?
Absolutely. The more that you can communicate that, the more that you can show that to the insurance company, absolutely, there will be a granular effect. As to somebody who goes, well, I don't have a way to prove that.
Yeah.
When you actually have a system in place compared to somebody who doesn't, you can expect to pay less than them.
Gotcha.
And I guess on the other side of the coin, I mean, you as you mentioned, there's the opportunity to potentially negotiate rates based on compensating controls that you have. But on the other side, if I decide that I am at high risk and I want additional coverage for, say, you said maybe in certain cases there's less coverage for something like social engineering. If I decide based on my risk profile, I think that there's a higher likelihood. Can I give you more money for additional coverage in that area? So how flexible are these plans in that way?
So it's very interesting you say that, because a lot of the mindset of most of us is, if you want more insurance, and as long as you'll pay more, then surely they're going to sell it to you, the greedy insurance company. Of course, they want as much money as they can get. But interestingly enough, I mean, you can find yourself in a harder market like we're in now, where you're going to just get a whole lot of declinations. Now, there's a standard market, which are more your names that you'll recognize, your Hartfords and Hanovers and Liberty Mutuals and things. And they have commercial branches and they have cyber departments, and they're usually want the cleaner accounts. Then you can go into the excess and surplus market, where they're going to take a little bit more, hairier type clients that maybe don't have all the controls in place, and you're just going to pay a higher premium for it. So there is that option. But interestingly enough, you can find yourself in a scenario where it's hard to get insured. Being a newer venture or a new venture in itself is tough. You might be new company, but you might have 10 years, 20 years experience. Okay, let's show them the experience, get the underwriter a little bit more comfortable. It's not your first time doing it, but if you're new in business and they don't have a way to really look at your previous history and things of that nature, that might push you in that excess and surplus market. The other issue you can run into is capacity in a harder market gets a little less as far as limits. So if you run into a contract that needs you to have 10 million in insurance, but you're a brand new company and there's 3 employees, you might have a really hard time getting that. And you figure, well, I'll pay for it. That sounds great. But some folks, they're putting up their money, right? If I'm going to put up 10 million for, a little guy who just started off, that seems really risky. So typically there's a premium point you can get to. What they'll do sometimes is quote it so astronomically high, you'll just say, I can't afford it. I'm not going to do it. So that's one way to get around it. But people get surprised that, well, why won't they just charge me a lot? No, they'll get their money. But, you really do. You got to kind of prove yourself in this type of market right now. I'm sure it'll soften up, but the way is all the stuff that you guys, pointed out, I had a client who, it was right after the insurance renewal and got sent an invoice, and it looks really legitimate. Of course, not from us, one from the company. So it should have been kind of obvious, and it was talking about insurance renewal. So they were able to find out that their insurance just renewed. They knew that down payment time was coming up, and they sent an invoice and they wired the money, and then said to who, and so there you
find a way, man.
Always find a way, and it looks really legitimate, but you just got to take it a step further and open, look at it. But
phishing emails from when we started in this industry have changed dramatically. It's amazing how much they've changed.
Yeah.
Well, like everything, we could talk about this forever. I'm sure Hutch and I both have other questions. I would love to have you come back again sometime and talk through some more granular type stuff and really dig into it. Let us beat you up a little bit.
Yeah. Y'all took it easy on me. I appreciate it. The warm up round. I'd love to come back. First podcast ever. And
awesome. Well, you did a great job.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Set Solutions. I've been a client of mine for 7-8 years now, and just really happy to be associated with you guys. So thank you.
Appreciate that, Nolen. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks,
appreciate you joining us. Hutch, you want to say your goodbye? Any parting comments about insurance or?
No,
Hartley.
He's ready for round 2.
Nolen, hey, it was great having you on. Really great insight, and I think this is an area that, honestly, it's an area that I think a lot of people really appreciate the insight in, because it's almost like what happens behind the curtain. Because most organizations, even if you have worked with cyber insurance, it's probably at a limited capacity. Yeah. So the insight that you provide is invaluable. So thank you for coming on and sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us for episode 34, live stream and the podcast recording. And if you got anything you want to bring in on this, please let us know once this gets posted. We're happy to talk about it. And Lauren, I didn't even look. I think we may have one comment, so I don't know, or a question. Do we have anything there?
It was just a comment someone made, not a question, around logging platforms back when you guys were talking about the NIST stuff.
Okay. Well, what does it say specifically? Maybe we can answer it real quick.
It's not a question. Every solution has the same access to the logging platforms. The difference is the presentation layer presented to the analyst. Having the best tool set in place helps shed light on that needle in the haystack. That is from Eric Stockwell, and he is a VP with, I believe, JP Morgan Chase.
Okay. Well, thanks, Eric, for the comment. That's interesting. I'm going to have to look at that, and maybe we can get back to you and just kind of have a discussion with you offline on that. So thank you very much. I think you're actually our first comment on our live stream. So that's, we're getting We're getting big.
are.
Huge.
It's getting
Huge.
serious.
I'm not trying to take credit, but Eric, thanks.
Your
No.
first time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Lauren, for working and producing this. And everybody, thank you for joining us. And we will be on another one, hopefully, in a couple of weeks. And by the way, sorry for the delay on getting one up. We had a lot of Black Hat and vacation and all kinds of stuff. So we're glad to be back. So, all right. See you for episode 35. Thanks, everybody.